We're going to talk about perpendicular and parallel lines. Perpendicular lines are just two intersecting lines that form a right angle. If I draw two intersecting lines and we have a 90-degree angle right here, then they're perpendicular. We often have to draw perpendicular line segments if we're drawing rectangles or right triangles. And students might need to create perpendicular line segments when they're using the geoboard to work with polygons. So geoboards are just usually a plastic square with either a square grid or a triangular grid on it, and you have a whole bunch of rubber bands that you can stretch to form line segments. Let's work with a virtual geoboard. So if your line segments happen to be vertical and horizontal and you're using a square grid, then you automatically have that right angle and it's really easy. But it can be a little bit more difficult if your line segment isn't vertical or horizontal. So what we're going to do is we're going to remember that a 90-degree angle can also be thought of as a 90-degree rotation, and we're going to imagine whatever our given line segment inside a square. So here I am enclosing it in a square, and if I think about rotating the square about the center right here, and so I would make the top line segment, rotate it 90 degrees, and I'll end up with this the square being the top line segment becomes the right line segment. So when I do that, the top right corner becomes the bottom right corner, and the bottom left corner becomes the top left corner, and I've created a set of perpendicular lines. There's another way I could have gone. So let's draw a similar one down here. If we started like this, I could have enclosed it in a larger square. And I could now be rotating it about this center. So I'm rotating the square about the center of the square. So again, the top line segment is going to become the right line segment. So this point right here that was the middle of the left becomes the middle of the top. This point down here that was the middle of the bottom becomes the middle of the left. And I have a right angle. Let's do one that's even harder. Maybe this guy right here. So how do I draw use a rubber band to make a perpendicular line segment? Well, I'm going to enclose this in a square. And then I'm going to rotate the square about the center of the square. So again, the top line segment is going to be rotated and become the right line segment. So here I had one space in, I had the end of my rubber band, so that's going to become one space in on the right. That's right here. The bottom right corner is going to become the bottom left corner. And I have perpendicular line segments. So I can use this to create shapes like right triangles or squares or rectangles that are not aligned with the grid. Parallel lines are two lines in the same plane that never intersect. So if I can draw them here, hopefully these guys never intersect. We would put little arrow marks on this to indicate that we were trying to make them parallel. We can also think about it as two lines that are always the same distance apart. And here we're talking distance that if I were to connect the two lines with a line segment, and that line segment was perpendicular to both of the lines, the length of that line segment would be the distance. So it wouldn't matter where I drew that line segment, it would always be the same length. So let's look at these on a geoboard. Again, if we are aligned with our square grid, then it's really easy. We have parallel lines. We can look at the distance between the two, the perpendicular line segment. It doesn't matter where I draw it. It's always going to be the same length right there. We could do this with horizontal lines as well. And following the grid, we'll have parallel lines. But let's go with the more interesting or the more difficult case, where we have something like this line, how to draw one that's parallel beyond it just looks right. Well, I'm going to step the same number of pegs away, and as long as I'm consistent, then I should be parallel. So let me show you what I mean. Here I have the end of my line segment, and if I go one peg down right here, and then I take another peg and I also step one peg down right here, then I have parallel lines. I could have taken this one and stepped one to the left. Then this top end point, step one to the left, and I end up right there. And so I will create parallel line segments in this way, right? I could have stepped two up, and there's another parallel line segment.